Hey there, welcome to Talking Texas Politics with Calvin. I know that school bond season has officially ended for the spring edition. We're now anxiously awaiting on the fall edition. But there was a couple of items in the Pilot Point ISD um, campaign that popped up during the campaign that I recognized, but I didn't have time to get to. So I'd like to go back and visit some of those things and kind of peel back the onions on how this campaign was laid out. So in one of my previous videos, I talked about how these consultants have a playbook that they go by and they kind of follow that playbook. And I don't really think that that's a good idea for the school districts to do that. I think if they would just come out and be honest, they would be a lot better off, because some of the stuff that these consultants will have them do is a little bit mischievous or maybe deceptive, you could say. And then we also talked about the political action committee that was formed to raise money to get these bonds passed, and how that political action committee accepted about $30,000 from out-of-town construction and architecture companies. And I provided links to those reports so you can see all that information, so you can see exactly who contributed, and you can also see exactly where their money was spent. And so what we haven't talked about was the influence of local media. And in a lot of these small towns, there isn't much in the way of media. However, in Pilot Point, there is a newspaper, and it's the Pilot Point Post Signal. I myself have subscribed to the Post Signal for at least a decade, I'll say. And this is one of the newspapers. My kids actually have read this newspaper. I'll come home from work and they'll be reading the newspaper. And, they have a little sports section where they talk about local sports. This is actually one of the oldest newspapers in the state of Texas, and it's won a lot of awards. And so during this campaign, I recognized early on that the Pilot Point Post Signal was being extremely favorable to the pro-bond side of things. And so several years ago, when I served in local government and I wrote a few op-eds, the prior editor of the Post Signal, and me and him got along pretty well. And we didn't agree on everything, but I certainly respected what he, the way that he conducted himself, and I always felt fairly represented. And so about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, he actually retired. And so they have another editor at that point, and her name is Abigail Bardwell. And I've never met Abigail, so I don't know Abigail. But like I said, I recognized early on that the coverage was extremely favorable. And like I mentioned, I usually will do things like write a letter to the editor or something like that. And I didn't even bother in this campaign because I just did not feel like I was going to be fairly represented. And so some of the folks who did write letters to the editor opposing the bond, they conveyed to me that they didn't feel like that they got a fair shake, that their stuff was trimmed down considerably. And I know that they have some word limits on that, but they definitely felt like they were unable to get their message across through that. So I didn't even bother. Now, one thing that the previous editor did not do that frequently was do an opinion piece. And Abigail did several opinion pieces leading up to the election. And these opinion pieces were very pro-bond. We have to pass this bond. It is so important for us to pass this bond. Completely biased to the side of passing the bond. And in the May 1st edition, which is the latest edition, today's May 4th, so last Friday's edition, Abigail did an opinion piece, and it brought up some of the topics that I had discussed in some of these videos, and I had showed you evidence to support. She talked a little bit about the playbook, which, like I mentioned, there's a consultant that's behind pretty much everything that has happened over there. And honestly, if the people who run the school board had made their own decisions, they probably would have ended up better off not following the consultant. But so she mentions the playbook, And she also mentions the Political Action Committee and all of those companies that, the out-of-town construction companies that have donated $30,000 to this Political Action Committee in hopes of getting this bond passed, in hopes that they would get some of the $295 million. And so she brought those up, but the way that she brought those up was, this is not a big deal. We need to pass this bond. Don't worry about this. Just glossing over the fact that they had taken all this money in from these outside sources. And it was like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I think that was out of The Wizard of Oz. But she obviously wanted to deflect, and move attention away from some of the things that I think are very important in these school bonds. And so I was wondering, well, why would that be? And then I didn't have to look very far, because in that exact same newspaper, there is a full-page ad for passing the bond. Support Pilot Point students, strengthen our community, vote for Pilot Point kids. And so the Political Action Committee, that was funded by the construction companies that were from out of town that are hoping to get a piece of the action, wrote a check to the Pilot Point Post-Signal. So the filing that I have was on April 24th. And so this is the one of the earlier filings. There will be a new filing in a few days that'll have more information. It'll probably have this expense on it. But on April 20th, the Vote Yes for Pilot PPISD Kids wrote a check for $547.50 to the Pilot Point Post-Signal. It is right in their expenditures. And so, does that have anything to do with the coverage? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that this is a very successful newspaper. This, as I mentioned, is one of the oldest newspapers in the state of Texas. And for a really legitimate media outlet to be having such positive coverage over something that they are getting paid, for ads for, I think that certainly is something that should be questioned. And so the reality of things is that things like this Political Action Committee and the $30,000 that came in from outside construction companies that have nothing to do with Pilot Point, Texas, other than trying to get this bond passed, that should be front page of the newspaper. I shouldn't be the one telling you this. The Pilot Point Post-Signal should be the one telling you this. And so it is disappointing to me that the coverage was so one-sided. And I'm not suggesting that the Pilot Point Post-Signal is corrupt, but I am disappointed in their behavior in this particular campaign. And so you can make the decision for yourself, but I will continue to be a subscriber to the Post-Signal. I'm not going to quit that, but I am disappointed in the way that they behaved during this bond. And they really did show bias. They may have, I can't say that they're corrupt or that they were bought off or paid off, but I can say that there was definitely a bias. So thank you very much for listening to me today. God bless you, and God bless Texas.